She never expected to see him again, the man who had once been her everything, only to walk away, leaving her heartbroken and alone. But when Emma answered the phone for a simple tutoring job, she had no idea she was about to step into a life she never imagined. Could love ever be rekindled after years of pain and silence? Or would the past haunt them forever? Emma's life was simple, a quiet routine she had come to cherish. She lived in a small apartment, nestled in the heart of the city, a place that felt both like home and a constant reminder of everything she had lost. Her walls were adorned with photos of students she had taught over the years, framed memories of a life lived in small joys and quiet sacrifices. As a teacher, Emma had always found solace in the classroom. It was a place where she could pour her heart into her work, shaping young minds while quietly ignoring the ache on her own. Her days were filled with the laughter and chatter of children, and for a while, that was enough. But when the classroom doors closed and the silence of her apartment settled in, she was forced to confront the emptiness that lingered. The past was a shadow that never quite left her. She had been young when she met Jake, full of dreams and hope. They had been inseparable, two hearts bound by a shared future, a future that seemed as certain as the stars. They had built their lives together, or so Emma thought. But Jake had always been restless. There was a fire in him, a drive to succeed that had pulled him away from her time and time again. She had watched him grow, watched him rise through the ranks of his business, as she stayed behind, supporting him, loving him, believing in the dream they had crafted together. Then, without warning, he left. No explanation, no goodbye. He simply walked away, leaving Emma to pick up the pieces of a shattered heart and a broken promise. Jake's departure was like a storm that tore through everything Emma had known. His ambition had taken him to new heights, but it had also stolen him from her. He hadn't even looked back, and Emma, though devastated, had tried to move on. She had no choice. She poured herself into her work, surrounded herself with the innocent joy of her students, and told herself that love was a luxury she could no longer afford. The years that followed had been filled with small victories and quiet defeats. Emma had healed, or so she believed. She had learned to live without Jake, to breathe without him, to walk forward, even though the shadow of him always lingered in the corner of her heart. But now, as she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hand, the past came rushing back. A call, a simple request to tutor a child, had turned her world upside down. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number, not knowing that the man who had once promised her the world was about to reappear in her life, not as the man she remembered, but as something else. But fate had other plans. The day Emma arrived at the mansion, she couldn't have anticipated the storm that was about to break. She had never seen such wealth up close, the marble floors, the towering ceilings, the walls adorned with art that only a billionaire could afford. Everything about the house screamed opulence, and for a moment, Emma felt out of place. She tugged at the sleeves of her cardigan, self-conscious of her modest attire, the simple pencil skirt and blouse she wore feeling inadequate against the backdrop of luxury. She had been to rich people's homes before, parents of students, colleagues with better salaries, but none had ever made her feel so invisible. This wasn't just wealth. It was power. It was a success, radiating from every corner of the house. Liam, the child she was meant to tutor, was a quiet, thoughtful boy of about 10. He greeted her with a shy smile, his eyes betraying a hint of nervousness. "Mom said you're going to help me with my math," he said softly. Emma smiled, trying to steady her nerves. "Of course, I'll help you. Math can be tricky, but we'll figure it out together." They walked through the grand hallways, and Emma's thoughts wandered, wondering about the family who could afford all this. She was brought to a spacious room, one wall lined with bookshelves, a large desk at the center, and a whiteboard on one side. It was a perfect space for learning. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a spark of excitement. This, at least, she understood. She could teach. She could do what she loved. But just as she was setting down her things, a voice, too familiar, stopped her in her tracks. "Emma?" She froze. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. The voice was too deep, too commanding, too much like the one she had spent years trying to forget. She turned, her pulse quickening in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Jake. The man who had once been her world. The man who had walked away without a word and left her to pick up the pieces. But this wasn't the Jake she remembered. He had changed. His face was sharper, his demeanor more polished, his eyes harder. He wore a tailored suit, the kind of suit that screamed success, that made her feel small, irrelevant. The air between them was thick, heavy with everything they had never said to each other. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emma's heart slammed against her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. She hadn't expected to see him like this. She hadn't expected to see him at all. She was supposed to be here for a tutoring job, a simple request. But this was the last thing she had ever expected. "I didn't know you were the tutor," Jake said, his voice low, laced with something Emma couldn't quite decipher. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room, and suddenly she was back there, back in the days when she had believed in their future, when she had trusted him with everything. The pain of his departure, the bitterness of his silence, rushed to the surface, raw and painful. I didn't know it was you," Emma managed, her mind racing as she struggled to make sense of the situation. Jake's gaze softened, but only slightly. He looked different now, like someone who had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of. Yet something was missing. The warmth in his eyes, the one that had once made Emma feel like she was the center of his world, was gone. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said, a hint of regret in his voice. I thought you'd moved on by now." "I did move on," Emma said quickly, the words more forceful than she intended. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. Of course I did." She tried to smile, but it felt stiff, unnatural. Jake looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emma," he said, his voice quieter now, filled with an emotion that felt so foreign. "You know that, right?" But Emma couldn't answer. How could she, when the pain of the past still lingered? How could she respond to words that meant nothing when backed by years of silence? "Emma," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. "I was a fool. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left you. I should have fought for us." She felt the weight of those words, but they felt like empty promises, like things people said when they had nothing else to offer. The Jake she had once known was still buried somewhere inside this man, but he felt distant, like a memory she could barely touch. The door opened behind him, and a woman stepped in, graceful, poised, with an air of elegance that matched the wealth around her. She smiled warmly at Emma. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "Liam's mother." Emma nodded, feeling a strange twist of jealousy and unease settle in her chest. She hadn't expected to see this part of Jake's life, this family he had built without her. "I'll leave you two to it," Jake said, his voice distant now, the tension between them palpable. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, looking back one last time. "I'm glad you're here, Emma," he said quietly. "I really am." But before Emma could respond, the door clicked shut behind him. And that's when everything began to change. Emma sat at the large wooden table, trying to focus on the papers before her, trying to force her mind back to the task at hand, tutoring Liam. But every time she glanced up, every time she caught sight of Jake in the hallway, the old feelings came rushing back. Anger, betrayal, longing. The air was thick with the things they hadn't said, the truths they had both avoided. Jake, for his part, seemed to be doing everything he could to avoid a direct confrontation. He'd left her alone with Liam, and though he occasionally appeared in the doorway, he never stayed long. There was a distance now between them, a distance that both of them felt, but neither knew how to cross. The house felt cold, the silence between them heavier than the walls of the mansion itself. As she sat with Liam, Emma could feel Jake's presence lingering, as if he were watching her from the shadows. She couldn't shake the tension, and soon she found herself standing, walking toward the window, trying to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. But then, the door to the study opened, and Jake stepped in, his eyes locking with hers. Something had shifted. There was an unease in the way he moved, a hesitance that Emma had never seen before. He wasn't the confident businessman anymore. He was the man who had walked away from her without a word, the man who had left her in a sea of confusion and heartbreak. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "I think we need to talk." She didn't respond at first. She couldn't. Her heart was racing, and every part of her wanted to run, to hide from the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. But this time, there was no escaping it. No more running. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about, Jake," she finally said, her voice colder than she intended. "You made your choice. You left. You walked away, and I had to pick up the pieces of my life. You don't get to waltz back in and pretend like nothing happened." Jake's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes. There was only regret, deep and painful. "Emma, I know I messed up. I know I left you with nothing, and I can never take that back. But that doesn't mean I don't regret it every single day. You have to understand, I thought I was doing the right thing, chasing success, building something for us, for you. I wanted to give you everything. But I was an idiot." She shook her head, stepping back. "You wanted to give me everything, Jake? You left me with nothing." "Nothing." Her voice wavered, and she quickly wiped the tears that threatened to fall. "You chose your career over us, over our life. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Jake opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He looked at her with a mix of sorrow and helplessness, as though he wanted to reach out, but didn't know how. "You can't just come back and say you're sorry," she continued, her voice rising. "You can't just expect everything to be fine because you've built yourself a mansion, Jake. You don't get to rewrite the past." The silence between them was suffocating. Emma felt as though her chest was caving in. She had always believed that if Jake ever returned, she would have the words, the courage to confront him. But now that he was here, standing in front of her, all she could feel was the weight of the years of pain and confusion, suddenly crashing down on her. Jake took a step closer, but Emma didn't move. His presence, once a comfort, now felt like a reminder of all the pieces of herself she had lost in his absence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Jake said quietly, his voice breaking. "But please, Emma, don't shut me out. I never stopped loving you." Her heart twisted at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he could be the man she had once loved, the man who had meant everything to her. But the truth was, she didn't know how to forgive him. She didn't know if she could. "You don't get to love me now, Jake," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't get to love me after everything you've put me through." Jake looked at her, his face filled with pain. "I didn't realize what I was losing until it was too late." But the biggest revelation was still to come. The next few days were filled with the quiet hum of life resuming, but the weight of the conversation between Emma and Jake hung heavily in the air. There were still unspoken things between them, things Emma wasn't ready to confront, and yet couldn't avoid. Every glance from Jake seemed to ask for forgiveness, but Emma wasn't sure if she was ready to give it. One evening, after tutoring Liam, Emma found herself alone in the library, sorting through some lesson plans. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed in from all sides. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering back to Jake, the man who had once been her everything, the man who had walked away. And now, after all this time, I'm back. Jake stepped into the room, his presence both familiar and alien. He hesitated by the door, as if unsure whether he should intrude on her peace. "Emma," he began softly, his voice hesitant. "I need to tell you something." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "What is it?" Jake's eyes faltered, and for the first time, Emma saw the weight he carried. I've kept something from you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." The air between them seemed to thicken as he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I have another child, a daughter." Emma's heart stopped. "What?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean for it to happen. After I left you, I met someone. I thought it was just a fling, but it turned into more. I never wanted you to know, but it's a part of me now, and it feels wrong not to tell you." Emma stood frozen, the room spinning. The man she had once loved, the man she thought she knew, had a child. A secret child. A part of him that she had never known. She didn't know what to say, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Why didn't he tell her? How could he keep something like this a secret? Jake's voice broke through her thoughts. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. But I needed you to know. I wanted to be honest with you." Emma's heart was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal. But amidst it all, something else was taking shape, an understanding. And that was when he realized what truly mattered. The weeks that followed were a mix of awkward silences and tentative attempts at rebuilding what was broken. Emma found herself trying to reconnect with Jake, trying to understand this new version of him. He wasn't the man she had once loved, not completely. Yet, somewhere beneath the layers of wealth and success, she saw traces of the boy she had known, the boy who had once made promises to her. But those promises had been broken. The pain of his sudden departure was still fresh in her heart, and as much as she wanted to forgive, she couldn't forget. So she focused on the small things, the tutoring sessions with Liam, the moments where she could simply be in the same space as Jake without feeling like everything was falling apart. Jake, for his part, seemed determined to make things right. He spent time with Liam, helping him with schoolwork, and even made an effort to get to know Sarah, Emma's student, who had become a part of his life after his absence. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that everything was built on shaky ground, And it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about trust. One night, after a long tutoring session, Jake found her in the kitchen, staring out the window. He stepped closer, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Emma, I know I can't change the past," he said softly, "but I want to try. I want to make this right." Emma turned to face him, her heart in turmoil. Could she trust him again? Could she let him back in? The scars from the past were still there, still fresh. "I don't know how to do this, Jake," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I can." Jake took a step closer, his gaze filled with sincerity. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness all at once. I just want the chance to show you that I'm not the same man who left." Emma looked at him, torn between the past and the future. The road ahead was uncertain, and the hardest test was still to come. But the hardest test was still ahead. The tension that had been simmering between Emma and Jake finally reached its breaking point one evening. It was planned. There was no warning. It all began with a simple argument over something trivial: Liam's upcoming school play. But the words came out sharper than either of them expected. "It's just a school play, Jake," Emma said, her voice tight as she tried to manage Liam's schedule. "Why are you making it into such a big deal?" Jake, already on edge, snapped back. "Because everything is a big deal to me, Emma? I've missed out on so much. You have no idea what it's like to be the one who's always working, always trying to make up for lost time." Emma's heart pounded, her patience thinning. "You think I don't understand?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the bitterness spilled out before she could stop it. "You weren't the only one who missed out. I missed out on you, Jake. I waited for you. I waited for a future that never came." Liam, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, watching the exchange, suddenly stood up. "Dad!" "Don't yell at Emma," he said softly, his voice cutting through the rising tension. Emma's eyes widened, and for the first time in months, she saw the child in front of her, not just as Jake's son, but as a bridge to the family they could never have. Her heart tightened at the simple words he spoke. He had witnessed the argument, felt the distance between them, and yet, there he was, standing up for her. Jake froze, looking at Liam, then at Emma. The moment was heavy with emotion, raw and real. "I'm sorry," Jake said, his voice faltering. "I'm sorry for everything. For not being there, for not seeing you, for taking you for granted, Emma." Emma's breath hitched. She didn't know what to say, but in that moment, something shifted inside her. The walls that had kept her guarded, kept her safe from the pain of the past, began to crack. "I just want us to be a family again," Jake whispered, stepping closer, his voice barely audible. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she reached out, touching his arm. She wasn't sure if they could fix everything, but in that moment, she realized they had to try. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days after their emotional confrontation were filled with small steps forward. Jake didn't overwhelm Emma with grand gestures. Instead, he quietly showed her, through his actions, that he was committed to making things right. His effort to rebuild trust was slow but steady, with each moment of kindness pushing them closer. One evening, Jake suggested a simple family dinner, just the three of them, sitting around the table, enjoying takeout pizza. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like a breakthrough. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just the quiet comfort of being together. Liam, smiling up at both of them, broke the silence. "This is nice," he said, and his words hit Emma like a soft breeze, gentle, unguarded, and full of hope. "You're right, kiddo," Jake responded, looking at Emma. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache with both sadness and hope. Later, as Liam drifted to sleep beside her, Emma turned to Jake. "I don't know if everything can be fixed," she whispered, "but maybe we can try." Jake reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Well, try. Together." In that simple promise, Emma felt something she hadn't in years: hope. They weren't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to build something real. A future that had once seemed impossible was now within reach, and in that moment, Emma knew that this was only the beginning of their story.